In this lesson, we're going to get started with the study of Latin vocabulary. And in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, Latin vocabulary is part of our foreign language study for high school. So for high school foreign language, let's just go over this real quick. High school foreign language, we want 120 hours of foreign language for 4 years. In order to do that, we're going to study Latin, focus on Latin. We're going to study Latin grammar. We're going to study Latin reading. And the third part of our foreign language study is going to be Latin vocabulary. Okay, so Latin vocab is a part of our high school foreign language study. We're not going to devote a lot of time to Latin vocabulary because we're going to learn a lot of Latin vocabulary in Latin reading. But Latin vocabulary, the Latin vocabulary course offers us some benefits that are worth getting for foreign language study. So let's just start by taking a look at this book. I'd like to talk about this book a little bit. This book was published, I believe, originally in the 1500s. It was published by a Protestant. This is one of the only Protestant books that I use in any of our courses. It was published by a Protestant named John Comenius. And it was important historically because you see the pictures in this book. I believe this was the first picture book ever made. The first picture book that was ever printed with a printing press. And it was printed for children to use to learn Latin vocabulary in the 1500s. So historically, this is an important book, and some people might get upset because it's a Protestant book, but it's a Latin vocabulary book, all right? And it was published at a time when even Protestants had classical education. Most of the early Protestants were Catholics who left the Catholic Church, but they took classical education with them. And so there were good Protestant schools at the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. And John Comenius, he was a good teacher, obviously wrong on religion, but he was a good Latinist, and his vocabulary book became famous and was used all over the world. There's another version of this that's published in Greek, which does the same thing for Greek vocabulary. But we're going to study this book. It's called the Orbis Sensualium Pictus. Orbis Sensualium Pictus by John Comenius. That's going to be our textbook for Latin vocabulary. And like I said, we're not going to spend a ton of time working on Latin vocabulary. We're just going to do a short lesson each week to add vocabulary to our Latin studies. What's valuable about this book for vocabulary study is that it gives us like 150 topics with a list of vocabulary words for each of those topics. So we cover all kinds of things: plants, animals, the elements, church stuff, cities, all different trades and businesses, and there's just many interesting topics with all the Latin vocabulary related to those topics. All right, so that's what's useful about this book for Latin vocabulary studies. That's all that I'm going to say for introduction because this is simple enough. All right, so Latin vocabulary, we're studying the Orbis Sensualium Pictus by John Comenius from the 1500s. That title, Orbis Sensualium Pictus, is translated on that first page. You see it says, a world of things obvious to the senses drawn in pictures. That's a translation of the title. Orbis means the world. Sensualium means of sensible things. And then pictus means pictured. Okay? The world of sensual things, the world of sensible things pictured. That's the title of the book. The first chapter, the first topic you see on this page here is invitatio. In Latin, invitatio means an invitation. It's the beginning of this book, and the author shows us a boy and a teacher, and the teacher is inviting the boy to study. And that's the beginning of our Latin vocabulary study. So we have this invitation. On the left side of the page, you see the English. On the right side of the page, you see the Latin, and that's how every lesson is. What I also want you to see, if you look down to the lesson under the picture, you'll notice that there are some words that are written in italics. Those words that are written in italics in Latin are the most important words in the lesson. Okay, so those are the words that you really should memorize. Those are the words that these lessons focus on. The rest of it is expressions in Latin and filler that allows there to be some dialogue or some reading. But the words that are in italics are really the most important part of the lesson. So we have in this first lesson an invitation. A schoolmaster or a grammar master inviting a boy to study. What we'll do is we'll read through the Latin, and then we'll look at the translation. We'll look at the words that are in italics, which are the most important memory words, and we'll simply walk through each lesson to make sure it's clear. And then you're going to study it on your own. Okay, so I'll walk through it with you so everything is clear, but then you're going to have to do the vocabulary study on your own. So let's begin. The title of this first lesson, the invitatio, invitation, it says under the picture there, magister et puer. Magister et puer. And in English, you can see it translated as the master, magister et puer, and the boy. Puer is boy, magister is master. Then we see that there's a discussion between the magister and the puer, and if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that the letter M is written before the lines that the magister speaks, and P is written before the lines that the puer speaks. You see that? Magister and puer, and their speech goes back and forth. MP, MP. All right. So to begin the discussion, the magister says, Veni puer, dice sapere. Veni puer, dice sapere. Veni means come. Veni puer, come boy. Dice, that means learn, it's a command. Learn, sapere, to be wise. Veni puer, dice sapere. Dice is easy to remember because you think of the word disciple. A disciple is a student, a learner. Dice means learn, like a disciple learns. Veni puer, come boy, dice, learn, sapere, to be wise. Then the boy, the puer, responds and says, Quid hoc est? Sapere. Quid hoc est? Sapere. Quid means what, hoc means this, and est means is. What this is, or what is this? Sapere, to be wise. So the boy asks basically, what do you mean be wise? What does it mean to be wise? What is this, to be wise? Sapere. And notice that sapere is in italics. So you need to make sure that you memorize that. Sapere, to be wise. The boy asks, what is this, to be wise? What do you mean? And the magister responds. And he tells the boy what it means to be wise. The first thing he says is, intelligere recte. Intelligere recte. Intelligere means to understand. To understand recte, rightly. Intelligere recte, to understand rightly. Secondly, agere recte. Agere recte. Agere means to act or to do. Agere recte means to act rightly, to understand rightly. Intelligere recte, to act rightly. Agere recte. Et eloquui recte omnia necessaria. Et eloquui recte, and to speak rightly, omnia necessaria, all things necessary. So the answer, what is this to be wise? The answer is intelligere recte, to understand rightly, agere recte, to act or do rightly, et eloquui recte, to speak rightly, omnia necessaria, all things necessary. Notice that my translation in the lesson here, as I read it, is going to be a little bit different from the English in your book. That might help you. Okay, I think my English might be a little more exact word for word than what the book has. The puer then responds. After the master explains to him what it means to be wise, the puer says, Quis docebit me hoc. Quis docebit me hoc. Quis means who. Docebit means shall teach. Who shall teach me, hoc, this? Quis docebit me hoc. Who shall teach me this? And the magister responds and says, ego cum Deo. Ego cum Deo. Ego means I, and cum Deo means with God. I will teach you with God. That means with God's help. God helping me, I will teach you. Okay? Ego cum Deo. I will help you with God's help. So the magister doesn't respond arrogantly and say, I'll teach you everything. I'll teach you how to understand everything. I'll teach you how to do everything rightly. I'll teach you how to say everything rightly. That would be arrogant. So he says, I will teach you with God's help. Okay? Cum Deo. Then the puer asks, quo modo? Quo modo? Quo modo means in what way or how? How will you teach me this? Quo modo? How? And the magister responds and says, ducam te per omnia. Ducam te per omnia. Ducam means I shall lead. Ducam, I shall lead. Ducam te, I shall lead you. Per means through, and omnia means all things. So the magister says, how will I teach you these things? I will lead you through everything. Ducam te per omnia. Ostendam tibi omnia. Ostendam tibi omnia. Ostendam means I shall show. I shall show. I shall show tibi, to you, omnia, everything. I shall show to you everything. Nominabo tibi omnia. Nominabo means I shall name. I shall name. Nominabo tibi, I shall name for you omnia, everything. So when the boy asks, how will you teach me? The master says, I will lead you through everything. I will show to you everything, and I will name for you everything. The puer, the boy, then says, en ad sum duc me in nomine Dei. En. En is an interjection. It's like saying, hey, look, en. Okay? En. Look, or see, the English says. Ad sum. Ad sum means I am here. Ad sum. Dukme. Dukme. Before we saw dukam, dukam te, I shall lead you. Here we say dukme, dukme. That means lead me, dukme. In nomine Dei, lead me in the name of God. Look, here I am. Dukme in nomine Dei, lead me in God's name. And then the Magister replies. The Magister replies and says, ante omnia, before all things. The first thing we need to do, he says, ante omnia, before all things, debes dicere simplices sonos ex quibus sermo humanus constat. Ante omnia, before everything, the first thing we need to do, debes dicere simplices sonos. Debes means you ought. You ought. Dicere, to learn. Debes dicere. You ought to learn simplices sonos, the simple sounds. Ante omnia, before all things, debes dicere. You ought to learn simplices sonos, the simple sounds. Ex quibus, from which or out of which, ex quibus. Sermo humanus. Sermo means speech. Sermo, humanus means human. Before everything, you ought to learn the simple sounds from which human speech, sermo humanus, constat, consisteth or consists. Before we study anything, before everything, you ought to learn the simple sounds from which or of which human speech consists or is made up. So the Magister says, I'm going to teach you the simple sounds just like we just studied in Greek. I'm going to teach you the simple sounds of the language. And he goes on the next page to teach all of the sounds of the letters using sounds that animals make. You've probably seen that lesson, right? We're not going to go through that because it's kind of silly and not really what we're interested in here. But he says, before everything, you ought to learn the simple sounds from which human speech is made. He says, quos animalia sciunt formare. Quos animalia sciunt formare. Which the animals know. Sciunt means know. It's related to the word scientia, which means science or knowledge. Which the animals sciunt formare. Which the animals know how to form. The simple sounds. Et tua lingua scit imitari. And your tongue knows to imitate. Et tua manus potest pingere. Et tua manus potest pingere. That means, and your hand is able to draw or write. So before everything, you ought to learn the simple sounds of which human speech consists, which the animals know to form, and your tongue knows to imitate, and your hand is able to draw. And then he finishes this, and we're going to finish our lesson here at the end of this second page of the vocab. We're not going to get into all the sounds that he goes into. Postea means afterwards. Postea, afterwards. Ibimus, we will go, postea ibimus mundum, we will go to the world, we will go into the world, et spectabimus omnia, and we shall see everything. Remember, he said, I'm going to lead you through everything, I'm going to show you everything, I'm going to name for you everything. He says, first you need to learn the simple sounds, and then afterwards we shall go out into the world and we shall see everything. All right? So that's this invitation, the invitatio between the magister and the puer. That's our first lesson in vocabulary. And then if you look at the following pages, you just see the author creates this fun little picture book guide to all the sounds of the alphabet from all the different animals and insects of the world. We're not going to go through that. You can study that if you'd like to, but we're not going to go into that. So the next 2 pages goes through the alphabet, and then the following page begins the second lesson. So that's all there is for this first lesson in Latin vocabulary. So lesson 1, the invitatio, magister and puer. What I would like you to do for Latin vocabulary, I'd like you to study it just like you study Latin reading. I'd like you to write out the Latin, be able to translate it. I'd like you to know all the vocabulary, not just the italicized words. With me explaining this for you and going through the whole translation, there's no reason why you can't learn the whole thing. Okay? So I'd like you to translate these lessons just like Latin reading, just like Gospel of John. Okay? So that's it. Every Friday we'll go through a half hour or so lesson in Latin vocabulary, and we'll move through this book as quickly as we can. Like I said, there's 150 lessons, so if we do one a week, it would take us 3 years to get through all of the lessons in this book, and we'll just go through it little by little. Maybe sometimes we'll have some more time to get a couple lessons done a week, but we'll just work through it one lesson at a time and get through as much as possible, because like I said before, this is just going to supplement or add to our vocabulary from Latin reading. All right, so there's no pressure on us in this vocabulary study. We just want to learn as much vocab as possible, and we're going to use this book to study it one topic at a time. That's all for lesson 1.